All right, welcome to episode 116 of the Random Thoughts podcast.
Yeah, that's it.
I thought today we would talk about... I had a really interesting conversation last week with one of our former athletes, and it gave me the idea. And he sort of said, could you talk about this on the podcast? So I was chatting to Luke Gerke.
Hey, Luke. How you doing, mate?
Hey. And Luke is one of the most explosive athletes that's ever been my privilege to work with. He was...
Yeah,
was and is still ridiculous.
Yeah, I played with him once in a little scrimmage once, and he can move. Really athletic basketballer.
And yeah, we were talking about a whole bunch of things. We talked about when he first started, because he had real movement challenges when he first started out. He wasn't good, but he was very relentless in getting better at stuff.
Yep,
and
super focused.
Really
intense guy, yeah.
Super bright, super focused. And he was mentioning that some mates of his had said, I'd seen him rolling before a lift. And they're like, you shouldn't roll before a lift. It's going to down-regulate your neural excitation and you won't be able to lift properly. He's like, I'm pretty sure that's not true. And he's asking...
Just wanted some clarification. So here we are going to clarify.
Yeah. And I think it speaks to a broader problem in society and strength and conditioning, which is that we tend to just kind of cherry pick a little, and we just look at a tiny piece of information in isolation and go, that shouldn't be, you shouldn't do that because of blah, blah, blah. And you're not really seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And people speak in absolutes because like science says. It's like, you know what, actually most of the time science suggests.
When you read the papers and you go all the way through the discussion, the author will go, this seems to suggest that there is a relationship between this and this, or this seems to lead to that.
Yeah, it doesn't shout it. Like the way people quote science, it's like science, science is like kind of some like a sort of Uncle Sam, like Uncle Sam wants you. It's like they're just saying, you must always do this.
Yeah, it's very dark side, light side, very Star Wars. Like you're either in or you're out.
And it's
so much more nuanced than that.
And I think the rolling thing is a great sort of analogous to that whole problem. Yeah, it's a great way of getting to the problem. So the short answer is that rolling before you do exercise is absolutely fine.
In fact, critical.
Beneficial. Where do we start? I think we're probably going to take it back one step, which is to talk about the fact that if you say to if your announcement is rolling still great for you, carry on everyone.
If that's the title of your blog article or your video or whatever, yep.
Gravity working terrifically.
Carry on as you were. Not so much of a clickbaity excitement going on there. Yeah.
Whereas if you say, stop your rolling, you're all idiots, you must do it this way. I've found this trick that you don't know about.
A few years ago, there was a whole bunch of people that clicked onto this whole clickbait idea, and they worked out that the ITB, your iliotibial band, is made of really thick, really tendinous fascia, and it actually doesn't respond much to anything.
Yeah.
Because it's really just like a ligament almost. And so what they came up with was, and because at that stage everyone was like, you have to roll your lateral quad and your ITB to keep your patella tracking nicely and keep your knees happy. And so everyone's like, stop rolling your ITB, it's a waste of time. And there were 50 of these articles came out that are different and respected authorities around that. And the whole thing was, don't roll your ITB, it's a waste of time. And then you get into it and go, it's fascia, it doesn't respond. Probably roll everything else though.
Yeah.
But everyone is going to go, rolling doesn't work. It's like, no. That's a nuanced part of it.
But on top of that, the hilarious thing is that the great thing is when you can actually have an argument face to face with a person about this. I had an argument.
A discussion. Yeah.
I think it was an argument.
It got that level.
And I did what I always do in these discussions is I spent a lot more time asking questions than shoving opinions up to a point.
Yeah, there was a good quote I saw the other day. It was, you should always, if you're ever in a conversation with an intelligent person or someone you respect that you don't agree with, try and see their point of view first before you try and change their opinion. So try and see how they might be right before you try and tell them they're wrong. I was like, that's really clever. It's like, you don't have to agree with them, but you just have to go, how did you come to that conclusion?
Because they're smart. Like
they must have followed some form of process. Yeah.
Anyway, so we're having this discussion argument, and and I said, well, yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe the ITB is not really the target area, but isn't vastus lateralis under the ITB? And don't we want to release off vastus lateralis in order to have...
Which is an enormous muscle on the side of the thigh.
Enormous lateral tracking force on your patella. And they're like, Well, yeah, I mean, it'd be good to release off vastus lateralis.
So it's just an issue of naming and semantics,
Yeah,
really.
so we changed, after that, we changed the name on our PDF to lateral quad.
Which I did a terrible job of at ECC. I was at the ECC tournament last week, and I spent the whole time going ITB or lateral quad. I just stuffed up, and I
did it too.
Yeah.
So Jacob was away at the East Coast Challenge,
which is a basketball tournament in Sydney for Basketball Victoria,
and did a cracking job. Been speaking to a lot of coaches since. We had the lowest rate of injuries in living memory at the ECC.
2 baby rolled ankles for 80 kids for 6 games or 5 games
one
each.
Concussion, which is not.
He got taken out by a teammate. I was there. That was a nasty hit too.
So great results apart from the fact that you called it ITB.
I called it ITB.
And then on Monday, I was doing sessions with the SCC, the Southern Cross Challenge, the under 14s and under 15s kids.
Yep.
And I called it ITB all day as well.
Yeah. Okay.
So how bad?
but the issue, I think, it speaks to the heart of the issue, which is it's not like that's just a naming issue.
Yeah.
Rolling the direct side of your thigh, whether you're chasing the ITB, well, you probably maybe shouldn't be chasing the ITB anymore, but whether you call it ITB or call it lateral quad, the fact is you're releasing lateral structures that are going to have that lateral pulling force on the patella.
Yeah. And it's an absolute no-brainer. Although that doesn't directly address the reason that
the power side of things.
Yeah, and so and again, it's that asking questions thing, because when you interrogate that perspective, what you find out is the reason that you shouldn't do it is neural comas.
Switches off your Golgi tendons and your muscle spindles.
And it's as though it switches them off for a long, long time.
For life. Yeah, that's it. They're gone. You rolled once. You'll never jump again.
And I agree that it does switch them off.
It has a slight inhibitory effect.
Yeah, but it's a nap, not a coma.
Yeah, we're talking seconds and easily waking up again.
Yeah, it's a really light nap. And the hilarious thing is the same people involved in sports like footy, where they do heaps of massage on people's
mid-game.
They're massaging the hell out of those hamstrings before players run on.
AFL game, AFLW game, switches to the bench, and you see the physio with both thumbs, middle of the calf, basically touching the shin bone, just ripping through it.
And it's like, and then they run afterwards, and it's like, oh well, that's different.
Foam rolling is just cheap, convenient massage. That's all it is.
Less effectively putting in the muscle to sleep.
Yeah.
And so there's that. But also the level of
and that's that compartmentalization. Sorry to interrupt,
no.
but that's that compartmentalization of information. It's like I heard a soundbite, I read a blog article or a title of a blog article, even worse, that said you shouldn't roll because it puts your muscles in a nap, and they just go, okay, foam rolling, that is now the worst thing ever before sport. But it doesn't live in the same category as massage.
It's a tiny little piece of information,
but it's part of this whole big picture that is recovery and warm up and things like that.
I don't want this podcast to become this thing where we're plugging the internship every week. It's not going to happen. This is not a pattern.
2 in a row, and then next fortnight we won't talk about it at all.
But I think that's a big part of what we offer in the internship is we actually give the information and then the tools to think about the information. And so when you think about the rolling thing, once you understand that it's a nap, that's really important. But the other thing to understand is that it's like with hip flexor stretching, people say, oh, you shouldn't do any stretching before performance. Well, you shouldn't do all stretching. I wouldn't stretch the calf before performance.
Or rec fem.
I'd stretch the hell out of the hip flexor though, because that's the handbrake for your glute, for hip extension. And so I think it's that idea of, in particular, that all the body parts are interconnected. So much of the science is about one muscle at a time.
Yeah, they do a test on just the calf. Yeah.
And so I said to Luke, you want to mobilize and loosen and then activate before you lift.
Yeah, and then you go into dynamic work, some warm-up sets, and you're good to go. It's woken back up by that stage. It's a 2-minute thing, not a 20-minute thing.
And it doesn't have to be. I mean, I think it can easily get to a point where there's too much fluff in a workout.
Yep. And we've been victims of this in the past. We've made that mistake.
Yeah. And you've got to have the meat and potatoes of the workout as well. And you can shorten up the warm-up considerably. Like if you're in a hurry, you can just get a tiny bit of each thing. You could be like, all right, I don't have time. I'm going to, under real time pressure, it's like, okay, roll your thoracic, stretch your crouching adductor, do a glute activation, glute bridge.
Well, I had this exact situation one morning up at ECC a few weeks ago. And so we got there at 7:30 and they had an 8 a.m. tip-off. So it didn't have long. And I had 2 teams across 2 courts, the 16 boys and 16 girls.
So it was how many athletes total?
So it was 86 or 88 athletes across 8 teams.
How many coaches?
There'd be a coach for each plus a supervising coach for each age group. So 12 to 14 coaches.
And then 1 physio and you.
1 physio, one strength and conditioning coach and a team manager.
Yeah.
And a million bus drivers, 4 bus drivers. Seemed like they were everywhere, the bus drivers. Because they had to coach, they go in shifts because it's a long
it was
drive.
hot as well.
First day was stinking and really humid. It was really, really sticky. So it was different to that Melbourne heat. It's quite dry down here.
Can we talk about that for a minute? I read a fascinating article, so don't lose your thread, about the changes to the heat, because heat is a theme. We're sweating at the moment. Heat's a theme that's quite topical for us at the Australian Open. So they've gone away. They used to have the wet bulb temperature gauge thing. Now they've changed. They've got a much better algorithmic approach which integrates radiant heat. So that's the radiation from the sun. That's just the beams.
The sun beating down on you. Yep.
It has radiant heat, air temperature, which can be different.
Based on like breeze coming through and things like that.
No, the air temperature is different again.
Oh, that's different again.
And then wind is another variable.
Oh, right.
And humidity. So there's 4 variables: radiant heat, air temperature, wind,
separate
humidity.
from right. Cool.
Yeah. And what they've found is that although at the Australian Open it gets up to 50, because you've got this terrible thing of almost no breeze because you're in
a bowl.
In this bowl, and you've got radiant heat coming down from the sun and then coming back up from the ground
from the bright blue ground.
And so it's people's shoes start to melt sometimes. Like, it's really hot. But what's interesting is they found that using that algorithm, 32 degrees in Flushing Meadows, which is where the US Open is played, is actually harder for the human body to cope with than like 50 in Australian Open.
Is that because of the humidity?
Humidity, yeah.
Right.
Because, and we know this, but I read it and I was like, oh, of course. Because sweating the sweat isn't what cools us down. It's the heat exchange from the water, the evaporation.
It's the sweat evaporating away from
That's where heat exchange occurs. And so if it's humid, you just can't exchange that heat.
Because the air on your skin is stuck next to the air in the water, the water in the air, rather.
Yeah. So isn't that interesting? 32 humid. So it might well be what the kids were playing up there.
Because it's only 32, 33 degrees, but sticky.
So that might have actually been the equivalent of 45.
And so while we had no injuries up at the tournament, we had a few kids cramp up on the second and third day, and I reckon it was because of a lack of electrolyte replacement on day one. And they just set themselves, played 2 hard games. They were really excited and nervous.
In a deficit.
I've watched a lot of kids drink a lot of water, but not much sports drink or sort of electrolyte shots.
They need more shots.
They do. And so they get the
They're coming soon too. We're going to start stocking shots.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So anyway, back to the ECC situation. Early morning, second day. It was a little cooler by this stage, but I had 2 teams to warm up super fast.
Yeah.
So what I did was I had them all roll each spot 3 times.
Yeah.
And literally that was one to roll and get a little bit of release, but second, because they're all sleeping, been sitting on the bus for an hour and 15 minutes, I wanted them just to move and just sort of roll around and actually move their bodies. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Then it was hip flexor stretch, glute bridges, skips, agility hops, which is a 360-degree ankle drill, some 45-degree cuts, and then they had the ball in their hand.
Yeah.
And that was it.
And it doesn't take long.
No, and that was, I was going between the courts and I had an athlete in charge on each side. It's like, Izzy, you doing this next? Tess, you doing that next?
And so did you use the app? You left someone with your phone?
Well, not for that situation because it was just one stretch.
Okay.
So I was like, just count it.
But for the other ones?
But for every other, when I ran large groups, like 40 athletes at a time, I'd have the app. I'd have the app in front of myself. I'd start demoing. And then as I got up to move around, I had someone stay with it and yell out change.
That's cool.
Yeah. So it worked beautifully. Yeah.
That's great. So where were we?
Talking about which very random today. We went on to heat, but we were talking about
warm up. We called it random thoughts because it's like I think you'll find it's what's advertised on the tin.
It's on the tin, exactly. I think we can just start a new topic now, along the lines of talking about the idea of compartmentalising information. I think we should get back onto the heart of today's episode.
Yeah, and it's just so much information is interrelated, and you've got to make sure that. What can happen very easily when you compartmentalize stuff is you actually have this wealth of contradictions that are just based on cause.
Yeah, or I read it once ages ago.
So, in AFL, the classic is we don't do any static stretching. That's been conclusively proven to downregulate
and dangerous and not good for performance.
But we do massage, and that's totally fine.
Yeah, but you really they're in one
or the other.
They're really in one broad category. They really belong together.
The category of relaxing and loosening things off. Yeah.
Which and Mike Boyle did this a while ago, where he went away from stretching and said, "I don't stretch." And then recently, or maybe it's not recently,
quite a while ago. Yeah.
But then more recently, since then, he's come back and said the one thing I got wrong was I didn't stretch. And so
Can I tell you my Mike Boyle?
Yeah, story? Please.
So in 2004, I was at Borders at Chatty, and I saw this book called Functional Training for Sports. I was like, that looks like a book I would like. And I bought it, and I'd never heard of Mike Boyle before.
I can't believe Mike Boyle was in a Borders in Australia that long ago.
Pretty lucky.
Yeah. They shipped in 10 copies, and 3 of them were at Borders.
Yeah. And I read his book, and at that point, I was on the end of my first season with a professional team with the Dandenong Rangers, and we'd won the championship, and we were wanting to repeat. And so I was desperately hungry for more information so that we could go back to back. Yeah,
because you were in like this part-time role, but taking it double full-time.
I was triple time on that sucker. Yeah. And so I bought the book, and I read it cover to cover in a day. I couldn't put it down because it was like, oh my God, there's this guy who's twice as smart as me, but thinks along the same lines, reinforcing my perspective.
Same, but better.
And 20 years ahead. Yeah. I was just blown away. And that book shaped so much of the sort of second. So my first growth spurt as a professional was the internship apprenticeship with Bruce. Mm-hmm. I learned so much. My second growth spurt was
that one day.
Yeah, it really was. It was such an eye opener. But the only thing I didn't like was he said that we don't do any static stretching. It's not effective.
It's not required.
Yep. And I was like, oh well, we can disagree on a thing, but I'm going to keep doing static stretching. I've seen felt enough benefits to do it. Sorry, go ahead.
That's the one thing that's the mistake everyone makes is they read something from one expert and they go, I've done the complete opposite of that. Well, they must be completely right. So I'll just completely flip. Whereas what you did then, I'm going to give you a little bit of praise. Is you're going, hang on, okay, how did I get to my conclusion? How did he get to his conclusion? Let's agree to disagree. Whereas most people will just take on that new information. Rolling is bad, even though everywhere else I've seen it says it's good. I'm going to completely flip what I've been doing.
Yeah, crazy.
And you should incorporate, digest, marinate, and then think on it, and then maybe change or adjust if needed. But these flipping from side to sides, it's too extreme, too often.
Yeah, I mean, and you want to change your mind. I mean, Mike Boyle's famous for changing his mind and stuff, but you want to do it based on when new information comes in or when a new epiphany.
When you just keep seeing new subsets, or new data.
But the really cool thing was that he then came back probably 5 years later and said, you know what, I was wrong about that. And the thing that convinced him that he was wrong was that, and he said, what I noticed was that every time someone had an injury, I would go to the physical therapist and I would talk about the root cause of that injury. And they would always mention that so-and-so was too tight somewhere. Every time it was something around
something was locked up.
Tightness.
Yeah, wow.
You know? And so he then decided to put it back in and found it to be great. And then he noticed that people stopped getting DOMs. That was the active ingredient in people not getting soreness.
So cool.
Yeah. But you could so easily miss all that if you just said, oh, well, science says don't, I know for a fact that you shouldn't. So, you know what, run your own little experiment.
The right doses at the right time.
On the right muscle.
And the right population.
Yeah.
As well. So if you do it with the right group, like some athletes don't need more flexibility because they're so loose already. Their sport demands that laxity, whereas other sports are stiff as a board, and that, like Mike saw, that's causing injuries and causing issues. So then you need to approach that and tackle that problem. Yeah,
and I think so. We've tackled the rolling because that's the thing that Luke, requested, and that was an easy thing to talk about. But it applies across the full gamut of things. So it can be your power stuff. It can be your strength. There's all sorts of things where so you've really got to interrogate that why and make sure that it's that you're thinking of the broader context, not just in the moment.
Yeah, and where you've read that, where did that piece of information come from? Out of what context has that arrived?
Can we talk about stuff before we wrap up? I'd like to do a short things we were really wrong on, where we were hypocrites, where we didn't apply that.
Oh, where we were so wrong. Yeah. Do you want to start?
I'll start.
You've been doing this for 20 years now. I've only been doing this for 5 or 6. So.
I've made so many mistakes. The top one that comes to mind for me, which Rob Blinkhorn called me and us on, was you should only have partial range. The range on your squats should be, our perspective has been, as low as you can get whilst maintaining neutral through your lumbar and sacroiliac, like your lumbar SIJ.
Which is something we still do. That's not the mistake.
That's not the mistake.
We're not all of a sudden squatting deep in the last 2 weeks, everyone.
I mean, we're happy to squat deep because I'm happy to chase range and I'm happy to chase load. But when it comes to your spine, I don't think range and load need to be mixed. So the anatomical argument is, well, people needed to, squat to do a poo. It's perfectly natural.
Babies can do it.
Yeah, everyone should. I'm like, yeah, hell yeah, everyone should be able to squat. But there's nothing natural about squatting 200 kilos. Unless you've got modern equipment, you can't get 200 kilos worth of people.
No one's doing poos with people on their shoulders. That's what you're trying to say.
That's what I was trying to say.
So you should be able to squat deep comfortably and sit there body weight.
Yeah.
Just you versus gravity. But if you're going to squat double body weight, 1.5 times body weight.
And you're not a powerlifter or trying to be Ronnie Coleman.
Big disclaimer there, yep.
Have you seen the Ronnie Coleman doco?
Yeah, it's scary.
He busted up.
He paid a price for what he built.
Ronnie Coleman, amazing bodybuilder, one of
arguably the greatest of all time, yep.
But he's a walking
He's
mess.
Only 50?
Yeah.
Not very older than
5 years older than me.
Yeah, so he's 50 years old and he's had his 4th hip surgery. He's got discs fused in his back. He's got vertebrae where they've taken the disc out and just fused the bones together, and can barely walk, doing all this, and just a mess. And you watch the videos and it's well, he pushed himself, but there was a consequence, and it's taken a while to show up, but it's there. Only at 50, that's a lot of life left to live as basically a cripple.
Pretty crippled. Yeah, it sucks. And I think feeling, being incapacitated is horrible for everyone. But I think it's particularly horrible when you were once such a physical specimen and where your physical prowess was so wrapped up with
He was amazing. He was the man.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry, I've got to subject a little bit. Again, this is the day for it.
So deep squats. If you're a powerlifter, if your goal is to be an enormous, impressive Ronnie Coleman-esque bodybuilder, then you probably need to squat load deep because that's part of your sport.
That's part of it, yeah.
But
maybe for the bodybuilder, I don't even know about that.
Well, the bodybuilder, you can get away with doing a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, you can work around it more. But if you're a powerlifter and an Olympic lifter, well, you have to go deep because the sport makes you.
But basketballers, footballers, soccer players.
Our perspective was we need to protect the spine from loaded full range motion. And we are strong on that perspective. I can't see that one changing because that's just anatomy, physics, physiology. But where we were completely sort of contradicting ourselves was we were insisting on full range of motion on dumbbell bench. We had to get all the way down.
And push-ups too.
Yeah. And Rob said, we're controlling range of motion on squats. Why are we just copying powerlifting on bench?
Yeah.
And it was in front of the whole group.
Intern group, yep. I think that was the second. That was James's group.
I think it was staff meeting.
Staff meeting?
I think it was staff meeting. I think it was later.
I remember James was there. James, myself, yep.
And I was just like, oh, right. Because the logic is, for an athlete, you're mostly doing bench press. If you go back to first principles, the purpose of a bench press in a program the purpose of any program is to, number one, prevent injuries, and number two, enhance performance. Because you can't enhance performance if you haven't done the first job properly. You can't enhance performance.
Yep.
And so the purpose of bench press, its primary purpose, is bulletproofing your shoulders so that you have the structures to withstand the randomness of sport, and also I suppose so you can shove people and push people, but it's
shove strength and stability.
Yeah,
you too.
And Rob said, well, where is the most likely way of the shoulder becoming unstable in the gym? And it's probably loosening off the anterior capsule of the shoulder. And so
deep bench press, then the other one's dips as well. Yeah. Which is one that we quite liked.
I love dips, yeah, and he was spot on. As you go into that deep range, there's an anterior translation of the humeral head, and you are actively stretching out the structure of the thing you are purportedly trying to stabilize. every rep.
It's just every rep is a contradiction.
Yeah. So we were massively wrong on that.
That was 4 years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, just before we opened up here. Yeah.
I think it was one of the best things to be wrong on ever, though, because it all of a sudden made me very suspicious of myself.
Yeah. You don't trust your own thinking.
I don't trust this guy at all.
That's so true. Yeah.
And so I think we've done a better job.
You want to eat some of that humble pie throughout your career every now and then. Oh, do you have got a little confident there, didn't I, Jacob? Calm down. Yep. Yep, for sure.
What's that Tim Minchin quote about opinions? So we'll link to it, but it's probably my favorite commencement speech of all time.
Oh, yeah, that commencement speech is brilliant. I watched one of his specials the other day. It's very funny.
He's so clever. Tim Minchin's an Australian comedian.
Musical comedian.
Musical theatre.
And his comedy is very political, but also not in your face and, I'm right, you're wrong. It's subtle.
And observational. But he's got this great commencement speech that I think if everyone in the world could watch that, a lot happier place. Like, it's really good. And it's not, I don't know, it's not
patronizing.
I just like it a lot. Yeah. But anyway, he talks about how there's that Clint Eastwood thing about how opinions are like assholes. Everybody's got one. Like, that's in one of his movies.
But it doesn't mean we need to see yours.
But there was another thing he said, which is, and he said, I think it's like, he says, unlike assholes, they should be carefully inspected quite often.
Yeah, carefully inspected frequently and taken through and really given a fine examination. It was basically the idea.
So I think Rob's observation there was really, really good.
He did a great job. My one, we're running out of time. Yeah, I'll just give one example. Mine was,
we've got so many.
Mine was the you're never strong enough. You should always put more weight on the bar. And I learned that quick. I learned that early. I could probably do with learning another big one soon, I reckon, just to keep me in check. You always do with a big shake-up of your confirmation bias. But yeah, before I started here, and even during my internship, I struggled to come to grips with that idea of, no, there is a sweet spot. There's an inverted, there's a diminishing returns effect of strength, where once you get to a point, you should start chasing rate of force development, power, explosiveness. And more weight on the bar or more weight on the dumbbells isn't necessarily a good thing for some lifts in some contexts.
Yeah, it's not always going to make you better.
I always just thought, if the weights are going up, we're winning, but that's not necessarily the case.
Do you know one of my favorite ways? And so the reason, and credit to Matt Barr, who's a brilliant Canadian strength and conditioning coach who I saw speaking at the ASCA conference. There was a round table on strength and power, and someone said, how strong is strong enough? And we had a number of speakers, some really good people, and different perspectives. So Dr. Greg Haff said, you're never strong enough.
And he still says that.
But he's from an Olympic lifting powerlifting thing where every bit of strength you get, if you get 5 kilos stronger, you are now 5 kilos better than your opposition.
Yeah, so powerlifting is the complete opposite of both of our situations where they fly directly in the face of that. But not many athletes are powerlifters.
Yeah. But Matt Barr, who trained rugby players who need to be really strong, he said you're strong enough when you are just to the right of where the law of diminishing returns graph flattens out. And I nearly fell off my chair because I was just because I'd never been able to articulate. I knew that there was a sweet spot, but I'd never been able to articulate
what it was.
And that's exactly what it is.
You've now got an exact location. So you want a bit of a buffer. So if you fall back, you've still got some strength in the tank. You don't want to, you don't want to be weak, pathetic in the gym, but you still want to have crack. But there is a point where it's like, all right, somewhere around 150, 160 on the bar, that's pretty good for you, and we'll just hold that. Try and do it faster, try and do it better, maybe incorporate some explosive lifts.
So this is great. And so that was an example of where in some ways I got lucky and I was at the right place at the right time. I heard a guy speaking and I was like, that's really clever. But the other way to arrive at those sort of conclusions, I reckon, is to take a process or to do a thought experiment. We take something to its logical conclusion. So to be Socratic about, are you never strong enough? So you've got a basketballer and they're squatting 140 kilos.
At a body weight of 80?
Yep. Is it going to be good for them to squat 300 kilos?
Just keep going, just stretch that graph out as far as you can, and see what happens.
And it's like, well, no, clearly not, because the risk of them trying to squat absolute max.
Every time they take that bar out of the rack.
And the neural cost of it.
The fatigue effect.
The time dedicated to all the preparation for it that takes away from their playing basketball.
All the sets and all the warm-ups. And
the fact that you can't then do any of your other stuff, so they're going to tear a calf because they've had to spend, they've had to do a 90-minute workout to do 3 different lifts, which is what powerlifters mostly do. They'll do 3 lifts in 90 minutes. And so that interrogating an idea by taking it through to its logical conclusion doesn't always work, but I reckon it's a great kind of trick, a great thought experiment.
Yeah. So I suppose to wrap up, don't compartmentalize thoughts and ideas too often. Everything lives within a broader construct and a broader thinking and philosophy, if you will. So the foam rolling idea that we started with, if that's the case, then that means all stretching is bad, all massage is bad. And it's like, well, footballers do that all the time.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not so much a coma, but more a nap, and you can wake it up with a couple of warm-up sets or a couple of runs or something like that, and you can re-engage those muscles. But then when you think about foam rolling from its long-term benefit, the benefits of keeping good joint alignment, keeping your muscles flexible, supple, recovering faster between workouts, all those benefits clearly outweigh any slight risk of a little bit of a sleepy muscle for a couple of minutes.
And when you come back the other direction too, it's important to go, yes, it's only a nap, but there are actually certain muscles that should probably not nap at all, like the calf. Like I actually want tension and stiffness in that calf Achilles complex. I do not want to loosen that guy off in the acute, like just before,
especially before sprints. Yeah,
So it's that uncatchy thing of be coherent, and it depends.
It depends. Everything depends. Should we leave it there?
Yeah, but what doesn't depend is watch the Tim Minchin thing, because it's bloody awesome.
I'll link that in the description.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to just having an excuse to watch it again, because I really like it. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Okay, thanks guys.